All right. Yeah. I'm Josiah, and I'm excited to talk to you today about what I'm building, which is Turbo. So, a bit about me and my experience. I've been a software engineer for the past over a decade. And over the past 7 years or so, I've worked primarily in Web3 and gaming. And on the side, I'm an indie game developer, pixel artist, and chiptune composer. So, I kind of live, eat, and breathe a lot of like Web3 and gaming, both professionally and in my own free time. And the question that I ask myself often is when Web3 gaming? And it's a question I ask because it exists, but it hasn't quite achieved the level that I want it to. It's not quite where traditional gaming is yet. And that leads me to ask, why exactly this is? And in my opinion, it's because making games is hard, especially for indie developers. A big part of game development, especially over the past decade, has been innovation from indies, and they face unique challenges. One is that it's hard to onboard into gaming, and game engines are very slow, complex pieces of software. You have to learn a lot to even get started, and they have really complex interfaces. So it takes a bit to get into it. And if you're able to get past that curve, it's also difficult to ship certain features. If you want, for instance, network multiplayer, if you want to like port your games to work on multiple platforms, these are pretty difficult tasks that most casual developers are not going to be up for. They'll have to plug into gaming backends that can cost a lot of money, or, just basically go without. And that's what a lot of indie games end up doing. And then when we get finally to Web3, the best part, that's the hardest part. It's not quite fun for most players yet. We're kind of stuck in this NFT play to earn sort of space, and there's not enough innovation happening that's like adding value for players that don't really understand Web3 yet. So those things need to change. And that's ideally what Turbo is going to do here. Turbo is a game engine that helps indie developers build games quickly, connect players seamlessly, and integrate Web3 seamlessly as well. Here's the obligatory meme slide where indie developers and Web3 developers join hands and use Turbo. And here's what Turbo does. Turbo basically tries to solve these problems by focusing on three main vectors. One is that it's very fast. Turbo, you can learn it in, I don't know, like maybe an hour. I think the API is very small, setting up is very fast. And as you make changes and update sprites, the game will update automatically without having to recompile. You can leave the window open, and it's a really nice experience to just sit there and update your code and see what happens. It's flexible, so it's got peer-to-peer network multiplayer built in. You don't have to worry about a big gaming backend for that. It supports almost any language because the games are based on WebAssembly, and you can run them on any platform, even the cloud. It's also innovative. So I've been recently working on some AI code gen features. So on the right, you can see actual screenshots of game Pong right there. And there's a code lapse of the code that was actually generated by an AI to develop the game code. So basically Turbo is also working on innovative features like AI code gen and built-in Web3, ZK, and asset sharing between all games to make them easy to mod and easy to fork for anybody, even with minimal coding knowledge. In terms of the market, Turbo is definitely in this like category where it's appealing more towards indies and Web3 developers. So kind of in this corner where there isn't a whole lot yet. And the market itself is actually really big. It's grown a lot over the past decade. It started out very small. I think, over, I don't know, like 10 years ago, there's barely anything there. And it began to blossom primarily on Steam. Today, it's, way bigger than it used to be, and it's going to continue to become far larger over time. And I have a good amount of experience to do this sort of thing because I've worked at LivePeer, building decentralized video transcoding applications, at Parsec, where I worked on peer-to-peer networking for real-time video streaming, and Phantom, where I currently work on the world's most user-friendly multi-chain crypto wallet.
Great. Thanks so much, Josiah. A bunch of questions for you. One, can you talk a bit more about indie game developer acquisition / distribution? Like, how do you get Turbo in front of your target game devs?
Yeah, so that's actually very interesting. The way I've been doing it so far is game jams. So I've been reaching out to a lot of people, and particularly friends who are in game development or coworkers I used to work with who are software engineers. And I've been trying to basically just get them to use it and get their feedback to see what's working, what's not. And so far, I think it's been a great channel for understanding what Turbo excels at. And particularly right now, it's the speed of iteration.
Got it. And when you do these game jams and product feedback sessions, what have been some of the most interesting ways you've seen people use Turbo? And has anyone used Turbo in any surprising ways?
Every time, every time somebody does something really different and it surprises me. And that's part of the reason why I like to do the game jams. It like one thing, for instance, was actually someone integrated AI in a way where they actually had an AI develop a whole script and they pulled the script into Turbo and actually animated sprites dancing around and saying the dialogue in the script to each other. And I never expected that to happen. Um, so yeah, I guess Turbo's flexible enough to support like all kinds of different development things I would never even think of. And I really enjoy that.
Very cool. Are all the games deployed on chain? And if so, what chain?
Uh, they're not deployed on chain right now, but they could be. The game code's actually WebAssembly bytecode, and the binaries come out to usually under like less than 10 megabytes, usually a few megabytes if they're, BC. They can be even smaller. I think the smallest one could be like a few KB. So they could go on any chain really. And Solana is like a good target for a lot of this stuff because it's fast and it's cheap, but you could totally put them on Ethereum as well. You could put them on IPFS. You can also embed them in NFTs too. So a lot of possibilities.
Very cool. And have you accounted for how game designers are going to incorporate crypto economic models into their games? So do you allow them to basically build economies or distribution within the game itself?
Yeah, it's very flexible. So while most Web3 gaming integrations, I think, give you a full toolkit out of the box, I'm really providing something that's more like the wallet provider API that you see in dApps. And that's kind of familiar, I think, to most Web3 developers. And it offers the maximum flexibility. So yeah, you can do whatever you want, really.
Awesome. Luke asks, do you think of Turbo as an infrastructure provider, so like an engine, or as an ecosystem where users flow from game to game, kind of like Roblox?
Yeah, I think it's kind of both. The short answer, and I would say that it's difficult to build an ecosystem. So I'm really focusing on building the engine first and proving that out and making sure that's solid. And then I have a thesis that basically once the engine's good enough and people like using it enough, that'll generate enough traction to see some games come out that people actually enjoy playing and see a lot of activity of people making games, working games, sharing games, that'll eventually blossom into a community and an ecosystem.
Cool. We have time for one more question. Praneeth asks, how do you think about IP monetization and hosting?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't really think about that too much yet, to be honest. In terms of IP, like NFTs and things like that, this is really flexible. So I think there could be some really good partnerships. And I think the iteration speed of making a turbo game is very fast. So it might be a great thing for some IPs to take a bet on, but there's not a lot of built-in IP and monetization yet.
Got it. Since we have time, I'm going to do one last question. Have you seen any interesting use cases of zero knowledge proofs in Web3 gaming?
Yeah, in fact, I'm working with a company called Blockless right now, and we're developing some ZK proofs, I guess proof of concept here for Turbo, where Turbo games have the ability to run headlessly, and they have some serverless infrastructure for building decentralized networks and generating ZK proofs. So we're actually making takes ZK verifiable right now, which is kind of cool.
Very cool. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Josiah.